Hi and welcome to the fourth episode of Beating BDD, a new podcast about body dysmorphic disorder from the BDD Foundation in the UK. My name's Claire Atherton, and for this episode I spoke to Gareth Stephens. In the space of just 8 years, Gareth has gone from being too ill with BDD to working as a CBT therapist helping others with anxiety disorders in South London. Here's his story. Hi Gareth, thanks very much for joining us on Beating BDD.
You're welcome.
I thought we could start with getting you to paint a bit of a picture of the way you might spend a day-to-day compared to how you might have spent a day when your BDD was at its worst. So can you talk me through what you did today and how that might have been different?
Sure. So today was a slightly unusual day because I was coming here, actually. Normally I would cycle to work, but I didn't. I got the train. I got the train to work, and I work as a CBT therapist. So I think I've seen a few patients today. This morning, and then this afternoon I supervised some sort of trainee psychiatrists within our trust. So I had 2 supervision groups this afternoon, and then a lot of admin in between. So that's obviously very different. So back when I had BDD, so back then I think my typical day would be kind of wake up at some point during the probably late morning, early afternoon, get out of bed, try and find some sort of stuff to occupy myself with during the day, and but that would probably have been derailed by the BDD. So I probably would have spent a lot of time sort of stood looking in the mirror, or taking pictures of myself or videos of myself, and sort of scrutinising those for hours and feeling progressively worse and worse. So quite a difference.
Absolutely, it's a huge difference, isn't it? So if someone had told you back then when you were living that kind of life that you would have ended up being a CBT therapist and helping other people with anxiety disorders, what do you think you would have said?
I think I would have been surprised.
Yeah.
I think back then things were so bleak that it didn't feel like that anything would ever change. I thought I'd always be kind of stuck in that position, and I think I was out of work for so long, for I think maybe 6 or 7 years, that it sort of got to a stage where I found it hard to even contemplate a different kind of reality. And so, the thought of having a job doing anything was sort of way outside my frame of reference,
Do you think if you hadn't had your lived experience of BDD that you actually ever would have chosen that path, therapy?
It's an interesting question. It's something that I've thought about because my mum studied psychology when I was a kid. So, I think I've always had that kind of inclination, to sort of help people, and that's the way I was kind of brought up, to be kind to other people. And recently my sister just discovered that we had some relatives. I think my great uncle, they were sort of missionaries in Africa, so I like to think they were kindly missionaries, so, but I don't know really. It's a difficult question, but I think their lived experience obviously sort of diverted me into this kind of route.
And do you think that experience affects the way you approach therapy, or makes any difference to the way that you approach your work?
Oh God, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It causes me a lot of stress, actually.
How's that?
Well, just because I think I've got such a strong desire to sort of help people get better that I think I put a lot of pressure on myself, or more pressure than other people would, other therapists would, to help people sort of get better and to. So I think, I certainly have a very different sort of view of things to other people within my team, within my service, and I think also the kind of team decisions that are made by the sort of management team and so on have quite a lot of an impact on me. I think other people, it tends to be kind of water off a duck's back, and they just sort of adjust to the new reality. Whereas for me, any kind of change instantly sort of provokes a sort of recognition of the reality for patients, and I can often find that quite challenging, because obviously I want to give everybody as much of everything as possible so that they can get better.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Yeah, it must be difficult.
Yeah, sure.
Should we go back then to when your BDD developed? Do you want to tell me about how that happened, how it manifested itself?
Yeah, so it's very hard to sort of pinpoint when it became a big problem, because obviously it develops over time. It sort of creeps up on you, and then all of a sudden, bam, there it is. I think, I've got distinct sort of memories from childhood, from, back when I was probably kind of 8 years old, 10 years old, 13 years old, of sort of incidents that made me very kind of aware of and self-conscious about my appearance. And I think maybe some of those kind of, because they were kind of fairly traumatic at times. So there was this one sort of instance where my uncle had come around to visit us, and we barely saw him. We saw him every few years, and I really kind of looked up to him and sort of respected him. And he sort of made fun of me and made fun of my ears, which was kind of really distressing at the time. And so I think, things like that stuck with me throughout sort of childhood and then early adolescence. And but it was only really in kind of, I guess, mid to late teens, so maybe 15 to 17, that the anxiety really started to become a problem, and I really started to feel very anxious in kind of social situations or any situation where I felt under scrutiny. So I remember assemblies at school in the morning, and then fire alarms where we all had to go outside and stand on the playground, and there were like, I don't know, 700 or 800 kids, and I found that kind of situation, massively anxiety provoking. And then from there, I think, kind of between the ages of 17 and 19, it got sort of progressively worse as, I started to socialise more, to go out more to pubs and things. It just seemed to get worse and worse. And then I went to uni at 18, but that only lasted kind of 3 months, because I just found it so hard to go to the lectures. I think I must have gone to 5 or 6 lectures, and that was it. That was all I could tolerate. Being in these kind of new situations, a lot of new strangers. It was very, very sort of difficult time. So I think that's when it first kind of became a real problem. And I think when I dropped out of uni that first year, that's probably quite a sort of defining moment in the development of it. Yeah.
What did the people around you think of that? I mean, they must have been concerned that had happened. Did anyone suspect that there was a psychological problem behind it?
I don't know if they did. They didn't tell me about that. And I think it was just a very difficult time. I think because of the age I was at, I didn't have very close relationships with my parents or even sort of friends. I had some very good friends, but we weren't sort of emotionally close, So I think, and I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know what anxiety was. I didn't have the language to even, elocute that to anybody, even if I'd, been aware of it. But I guess, I certainly wasn't aware of it. I was very much sort of in denial. I just knew that these were difficult, unpleasant situations, but I didn't really think any more about them than that, which is kind of strange given the huge impact it was having. So I guess even if somebody would have asked me, I wouldn't have told them that I was feeling anxious. I think I would have come up with another reason. I think when I dropped out of uni, I probably told my parents that I didn't like the course or something like that,
Someone else I spoke to was saying, well, I just kind of assumed that everyone felt like that inside. I mean, did you have an element of that?
No, definitely not. No, I think I would have felt much better if I did. I think for me, I thought I was the only person who felt like that.
Yeah.
So it was only years later, kind of, 10 years later, when I spoke to David Veal for the first time. And this was after speaking to, numerous psychologists who had never mentioned BDD. I just happened to see the program that he had been in on the BBC called Too Ugly for Love back in the 90s, or maybe early 2000s actually. And then I sort of paid for a private assessment with him, and he was the first person I spoke to who knew what BDD was and kind of understood what I was talking about. So no, I think I felt very alone with it. But I wish I had known somebody who understood what I was going through. Yeah.
So how long was there then between dropping out of university and actually getting your diagnosis? It was quite a period of time, presumably.
Yeah, it was a long time. I think 8 years, maybe 9 years, probably 9, I think. So I kind of, dropped out of uni, had various jobs, but couldn't hold them down because the anxiety was so bad, kept dropping out of, leaving jobs and being unemployed for long periods of time. I think when I was about 24, I started to have panic attacks at work. So I went to see I didn't go to see my GP. I sent my GP a letter because I was so anxious about going. And, she was really brilliant. She called me and arranged for me to come down and see her after her normal surgery had finished. So, but, it was a strange GP surgery in that you couldn't book an appointment. You had to go down and just wait, and you all were given a number when you went in. But it was a tiny waiting room, and all the chairs faced each other. So for me, it was like the worst situation imaginable. And all the old people always got there at 7 a.m. in the morning and stood outside. So you were always kind of at least halfway down the queue. So it just seemed sort of too unbearable. But she was lovely. She let me come down after surgery one day and talk to her about kind of how I was feeling a little bit. And even then I didn't realise that it was BDD and that it was appearance related. I just knew that I was having these awful sort of physical symptoms at work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she then kind of put me in touch with the local psychological therapist team, who unfortunately didn't seem to know anything about BDD either. So there were then a kind of number of years where I spoke to two different psychologists for 18 months each, with a graduate mental health worker sandwiched in the middle of 6 months, and didn't really make any progress. I think during the first course of treatment, I was getting sort of increasingly desperate that the therapist just wanted to talk about my childhood and nothing else. So I did some online research, and I came across the Beck Institute in America, and they were talking about social anxiety, and that seemed to sort of vaguely fit what I had. So I was really sort of enthusiastic, and I printed this stuff off and took it to my therapist, and I was like, look, this is what I've got. And she sort of smiled and nodded, and then went back to talking about my childhood. And, we never spoke about anxiety again, really. So I think later on we did have a bit of a half-hearted attempt at doing some very sort of basic graded exposure, but it was effectively pointless, given that we now know that approach to even social anxiety isn't the most helpful, let alone to BDD. So I think, it was probably kind of 4 or 5 years of trying different therapies, and then also trying every medication under the sun, none of which really helped, before I saw the BDD program paid for a private assessment with David Veal, hoping that he would write me a treatment plan that I could then take back to my therapist. And he did say that he would be willing to do that, but that they would probably deviate from that if they hadn't even given me a diagnosis. So he recommended that I have some treatment at the residential unit at the Bethlehem, and that's ultimately where I went after a very long and protracted funding battle.
Gosh, you must have felt did you feel quite desperate at times during that period that you just weren't getting anywhere?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never kind of self-harmed, but there were certainly times where, I've got very clear sort of memories of times where I got so desperate that the feeling of sort of just despair and frustration was so great that I felt like I just really wanted to sort of self-harm to get some kind of release, but thankfully I discovered, that if I went out of my front door, we lived on a very steep hill, and if I sprinted up the hill as fast as I could until I couldn't sprint anymore, that managed to damp the feelings down. So,
what happened to your friendships and other relationships during that period, and relationships with your family, and did you have any romantic relationships during that period?
So my friendships all sort of fizzled out as the anxiety became more and more prevalent, and I was unable to, hang around with people. So I became very sort of socially isolated. But I think I started to kind of take on more responsibility at home. So my mum had just moved into a new house, so I practically kind of, rebuilt that because there was a lot of work that needed doing. So I sort of kept myself busy, but I was very, very isolated. I think at some point during that period of time, I did discover an online support group, which unfortunately no longer exists, but it was called BDD Central. It was an American group, and through that I met my ex-girlfriend, who was American, lived in America, and she was great. She was just a fantastic woman, and had a really sort of big influence on me, and really sort of made me see that actually, even though I feel that I look this particular way and that my life will be ruined forever, maybe it won't be, and I think meeting her sort of gave me that sort of chink of light and gave me a little belief that maybe things could be different, and maybe the way I saw things wasn't the way that everybody saw things.
Do you mind telling me how it was that you did view yourself? What were your particular things that you're concerned about?
I mean, how long have you got? It was sort of mainly that my kind of ears I felt were too big and stuck out too much. My nose was too sort of prominent for my face, vastly out of proportion. That my face was too thin, my head was too small for my body. And then there was some kind of other stuff about, I guess, kind of approaching sort of muscle dysmorphia, sort of feeling much too skinny and so on. So yeah, I think those are the main things. Oh, and then my eyes as well. So I thought my eyes were very sort of just way too big for my face, way too bulging, And I went to see various plastic surgeons about this and had various sort of consultations.
Did you ever go through with anything? Any sort of
Yeah, I had my
treatment?
ears pinned back.
Oh, did you?
Which was actually a very positive thing, I think. Like, it enabled me to get a different haircut, which was good. But aside from that, no, like I did go to see about sort of rhinoplasty and also about this sort of weird jaw surgery called orthognathic jaw surgery. So I was trying to get them to sort of split my chin and widen my jaw.
That sounds horrific.
And then sort of alter the sort of dynamics. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't have it done, I've got to say.
No. Yeah. So when you saw Dr. Veal and he then said to put you forward for residential care, what form did that take? How long are you in there and what kind of thing did you have to do?
So I was there for 12 weeks. And I had a therapy session 4 days a week. They were tended to be an hour and a half to 2 hours long, so it was really intense. That was for the first few weeks, and then the sessions phased out a little bit, so we went into 3 sessions and then to 2 sessions for the final sort of block. And I think their system's changed now, actually. I think it's now 16 weeks and 2 sessions a week, so it's a slightly different format. But they've got a big sort of occupational health program there as well, occupational therapy program, sorry, not occupational health. So there are a lot of sort of other activities that you can get involved with that will help to challenge the BDD. So when I was there, they had a swimming pool, so you could go swimming. So it was just a very sort of intense experience, I think. Suddenly being sort of moving from a situation of relative isolation to being sort of thrust into this environment where you're living with kind of 14 other people, all in very close proximity. It was quite intense. And the therapy sort of mainly involved, I guess, first of all, understanding what was keeping the BDD going. So a lot of the sort of behaviours I was doing, the mirror checking, the scrutinising my appearance, and then avoidance of a lot of things, that was a big thing for me. So we sort of developed a shared understanding of that, and then we started to reverse some of that stuff. So I think a big thing for me was changing the sort of relationship I had with my thoughts. So up until that point, when I'd spoken to anybody about CBT, they'd talked about trying to sort of challenge my thoughts and take a different perspective. But it was very different in the treatment I had. It was about recognising when the thought process starts to kind of spin up and to kick in, and then, using my sort of focus of attention to switch off from that person, focusing elsewhere, which was, incredibly liberating once I was able to do it. It took some practice, certainly, but it was just an incredible thing to learn. And then I guess sort of coupling that with, dropping all of the stuff I used to do, so dropping the mirror checking, stopping sort of wearing particular clothes, wearing whatever was suitable for the day, whatever I wanted to be wearing, rather than whatever I felt safe, and then starting to go into some of the situations that I'd been avoiding, which was pretty much everything.
Yeah. How uncomfortable was that process?
It was horrific.
Was it? Yeah.
Really uncomfortable. I think, thankfully I had a really good therapist. She was a bit of an ass kicker, if I can say that. She was very firm, but she was also very kind of warm and compassionate. And I think it was a really good sort of combination. I think I needed that. I think I needed somebody who cared, but somebody who was going to push me. So yeah, it was kind of brutally hard. I had to undo everything I've been doing for years and do the opposite. And it was really difficult. I remember one of my friends asking me once what the kind of therapy was like, and I was trying to put it in terms that he would understand, and I knew that he was scared of sharks. So I said, well, it's just like you go and swim with sharks every day. It was that kind of intense, but it was definitely worth it. Within even kind of 6 weeks, things were just dramatically different. I was doing things that I would never have dreamed were possible, or could be enjoyable. So
yeah. Was there a particular moment, a eureka moment, anywhere along the line where you thought, actually, this is something clicks into place? I'm getting it.
Yeah, there were 2 actually. The first one was, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks into therapy when. So one of the groups of people that I found most difficult was teenage school children. So quite early on, I think probably week 2 or 3 maybe actually, I had to do these some behavioural experiments where I went to walk around the local area when it was lunchtime and all the sort of high school kids were out. I used to tell the other residents in the unit that I was going to expose myself to school children because it was an exposure exercise, and it brought a bit of levity to it. But, all I had to do really was go out and sort of walk around and just sort of hang around and let them sort of look at me and be in places where they could look at me. And I remember walking up this road one day, and I got to the top of the road, and it was a T-junction. On my left-hand side were 3 school children, and on my right-hand side were 300 school children. So everything in my body was saying, turn left, walk down there. But I kind of recognised all of a sudden that actually that was taking me back the old way, you know. So really what I needed to do was turn right and walk through the 300 school children. So that's what I did. And that was a really kind of pivotal moment, I think. Learning to sort of go against that instinct was something, you know, that just really helped me from then on. Because then once I recognised that that's what I needed to do, then it became very clear in my head and I couldn't really avoid it. So that was one. And the other was... maybe week 6 or 8 in treatment. I'd gone into the local town, Bromley, and I was sat in a cafe on my own having a cup of tea and a piece of cake. And previously, like, I couldn't have dreamed doing something like that. It seemed like such an alien idea. I didn't know people even did that. You know, I thought everybody went in at least with somebody else. And I remember being sat there and I was kind of looking around and feeling very anxious, but I was trying to keep my focus sort of external and on what was going on around me and the taste of my cup of tea and the taste of my cake. And all of a sudden something just clicked and I just thought, this is great. I'm really enjoying this, you know. And like I never, like I say, I never could have believed that would have been possible. Like up until that point, I firmly believed that the only reason people went to cafes was because they thought that that's what people did. I didn't really believe that anybody enjoyed it. So I guess going back to what you were saying earlier, yeah, maybe I did sort of feel on some level that everybody found some things uncomfortable.
Do you think that the tactics that you learned, the strategies and things helped you in other areas? Because there's such a crossover, isn't it? Like you mentioned social anxiety earlier, and health anxiety is also quite closely linked. Do you think that those strategies can help people to tackle anxiety problems more widely?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of kind of, without getting too technical, transdiagnostic processes, you know, that cut across all diagnoses and different disorders, you know. So, yeah, I think definitely, you know, it's interesting. We've got specific models for treating specific conditions that sometimes don't incorporate some of the things that are in other models. And, you know, don't tell my employers this, but I'm not massively sure I agree with that. Like, I think, you know, there are some things that work better for some disorders than others, but that means we should exclude a particular sort of technique, you know. I think it's a little bit kind of, I don't agree with it. So yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, for me, working on the BDD definitely damped down a lot of other stuff. But that's not to say that treatment was the kind of, it was the thing that's made the most sort of impact on my anxiety, or had the most impact. But it's been one of a number of things that have helped me. You know.
What kind of thing?
So I think having a relationship, or having 2 relationships, you know, first of all with my ex-girlfriend, the American, who was amazing, and then with my recent girlfriend, who I've been with for 9 years now. If I've got that right, I should kill me. You know, so I think those things have been really, really good. You know, they've both been great sources of support, but also have just sort of fed that kind of feeling of normality, that I'm just a normal person. This is a normal relationship, you know. So that's been really sort of crucial for me. And then I've had a lot of involvement with other kind of organisations outside of the therapy. So I did an assertiveness course in my local area, which was really helpful. I then set up a sort of assertiveness group there and ran that for a few years, and that gave me a lot of confidence, you know. But I was able to do that in a kind of service user led charity, so I felt very much when I was running the group that I was just amongst my peers, you know, so it was a more manageable situation than you know, a different type of sort of work situation would have been. And I think then also just kind of reading about other anxiety disorders and things that are sometimes helpful with those, and learning a few of those techniques, like, you know, diaphragmatic breathing I found very, very helpful. You know, I don't walk around all day going, you know, trying to stay calm. But there have been points where, you know, my anxiety has been very, very high, where a couple of breaths like that have really helped to sort of calm things down. And that wasn't part of my therapy, and it's something I learned myself, but it's been very useful. So, and I guess also then kind of having a lot of involvement with service user support groups. So I was a member of Social Anxiety UK for a number of years and very sort of actively involved with that. And again, that was just massively helpful, talking to people who felt the same. I did have a diagnosis of social anxiety as well as BDD, actually, to point out. You know, that was just incredible. And on that forum, they often arrange meetups with other people with social anxiety, which can be slightly awkward and anxiety-provoking because everybody's feeling anxious, but was just, such a useful thing, to be able to practice socialising with people who also felt anxious really kind of took the pressure off. So the therapy was central to my recovery, but one of a number of different things that have ultimately helped.
You obviously talked a lot about the sort of exposure therapy and things that you had to do and things you had to stop doing. But what about the thoughts? Because obviously you were learning to distract yourself, but have you got to a point where the thoughts don't actually come anymore?
Well, without meaning to be pedantic, I've just got to point at the difference between distracting yourself and letting, and it's got sort of switching off from thoughts. Because distracting, is, I can't think about that. Let's focus on this. Whereas I was sort of recognising that the thoughts were there, but then just not engaging with them and letting go of them. And it feels like a very small distinction, but it can be quite important, actually.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
So I suppose the question is, do you still have what you think you would class as dysmorphic thoughts?
No, not really, no. Like I think it's hard to sort of to be able to pinpoint when the thoughts stopped. But I think after the therapy, I was so sort of practiced in disengaging with them that the frequency of the thoughts really sort of reduced. Probably over the next sort of few years after therapy, as I was continuing to sort of push myself and do all manner of random, terrifying things. Yeah, there was some point where the thoughts just stopped coming, and I think in the last kind of, at least 5 or 6 years, I probably had, 2 thoughts that I can remember clearly. And on both occasions, I went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and then thought to myself, no, I don't do this anymore. And I was able to just walk away, forget about it, the distress went, and got on with my day. And actually, I've had the opposite in the last kind of 12 or 18 months. I think, maybe the last 12 months. I was at a hospital appointment in Cambridge, sat in a cafe with my girlfriend, and there were 2 people sat at the table across from us. And the woman who was facing me, so the guy had his back to me, the woman was facing me, she kept sort of glancing at me and saying things to the man. So, it made me feel slightly uncomfortable because, normally that would have just sent my anxiety through the roof. But I thought, no, let's just carry on with what you're doing, enjoy your coffee, talk to Janine. And then after a while, the man turned around and looked at me as well, and then turned back. So again, that would have been a horrific thing to happen. That would have sent me into a spiral for days, But I kind of sat there and I sort of processed what happened. And then I thought to myself, maybe they like my haircut. And just carried on with what I was doing. And that was the first time. Yeah. And I carried on with what I was doing. And I was like, shit, a positive thought. Oh, sorry, can I say that? Yeah. A positive thought.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I've ever really kind of noticed that.
Yeah. That's amazing. What a transformation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you could go back then to when those very first sort of seeds of the BDD when you were a really young child, what would you say to yourself to sort of soothe yourself or even try and stop it in its tracks? Do you think there would have been a way of stopping it?
I don't know. It's a big question. Like I think I probably would have said, just sort of don't worry about what the people think. Like none of this stuff is going to make any difference. One day, it'll feel in your teenage years like it makes a lot of difference and that this is the world. But actually, this isn't important. These people aren't important, And I think it's very hard to feel that as a kid, though, because you're trapped with those people 5 days a week, But probably something like that. But I don't know if it's possible to stop it in its tracks. I think, I think there's the genetic component, there's the environmental component, and I think... some of those things we can't control. We can't control for them. We can't stop children being cruel to other children. We can't sort of eradicate some of those difficult social experiences. So, I don't know if it's. I don't believe it's possible. I don't want to sound too sort of negative about that. But what I do know is possible is that people can get better if it develops.
Yeah. So on that note, imagine if you were talking to someone now who was saying, I'm just never going to feel as good as you. That was well done, you, but it's not going to happen to me. What would you say to them?
But I think I'd say, yes, it's really crap, and I understand that. And 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I wouldn't have believed that things could be any different. But I think I remember David Veal saying to me, really important to try and sort of open a door in your mind to the possibility that the way you see yourself may not be the reality. And I think that really kind of helped me. So I'd really, tell people to try and do that. And then I guess beyond that, if you can get some decent therapy from somebody who knows how to treat BDD, which can be a challenge, then I would just say, just kind of go for it. It's hard to know what that experience would be like as an outpatient, because I had inpatient treatment. And I think that prevented me from avoiding what I was supposed to be doing. I was there for one reason and I had to do it. And I think that's very difficult sometimes with outpatient treatment, because you have your hours therapy, and however committed you are, you then go away and everything else crowds into your mind, But I think I'd say to sort of have some faith in your therapist and to have some faith in the therapy. And just to try and sort of push yourself as much as you can, because what have you got to lose? You're in a terrible situation. This is a terrible condition. You feel horrendous, most of the time. It completely destroys your life. It stops you doing all the things you want to. It destroys your relationships. It stops you hitting all the kind of milestones you want to hit in life. So really, what have you got to lose? Just do everything you can to switch off from what your brain is telling you. It isn't telling you the truth. So try not to listen to it. Try and treat it as, a dithering old relative that doesn't really know what it's talking about. In this regard, it's very reliable in other regards, but in relation to your appearance, it's probably talking nonsense.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. I think we've had a really good chat, so thank you very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Gareth. I think it shows clearly that however bad things may seem, complete recovery really is possible. To tell us what you think, or to find out when we publish new episodes, just follow the BDD Foundation on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube and Facebook. Finally, a quick disclaimer, this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.